it hurts.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, my is probably just slightly recovering.
She was the unforgettable face of an era, quirky, brilliant, and impossible to ignore. Shelley Duvall starred in The Shining, Annie Hall, Popeye, and films that cemented her as one of Hollywood's most unusual and magnetic performers. But just as quickly as she rose, she vanished. For more than 20 years, the world barely heard her name, and rumors filled the silence. Some said she had been broken by the pressures of fame. Others whispered about hidden struggles and private battles that kept her far away from the cameras. Yet the truth is far more complicated and far more human. Shelley's disappearance was not the end of her story. It was the start of a chapter no one expected. And when the real reasons finally came to light, they revealed a Hollywood story unlike any other. In the 1970s, Shelley Duvall's career looked unstoppable. She had been discovered by director Robert Altman in Houston, Texas, when she was barely out of her teens. What started as a chance encounter quickly became the launch of a remarkable career. Altman saw something unusual in her, a presence that was different from the traditional Hollywood starlet. Shelley was not conventionally glamorous, yet she had an unmistakable screen magnetism, with wide eyes and a delicate frame that made audiences pay attention. Altman cast her in Brewster McCloud in 1970, and from there, she became his muse, appearing in films such as McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Thieves Like Us, and Nashville. By 1977, her talent was undeniable. She won the Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival for her haunting role in Altman's Three Women. Critics described her as otherworldly, capable of blending fragility with an unpredictable edge. Around the same time, she appeared in Woody Allen's Annie Hall. And suddenly, Shelley Duvall was not just an Altman protege. She was a rising star who could move seamlessly between indie credibility and mainstream success. Then came the role that defined her for generations, Wendy Torrance in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Released in 1980, the film terrified audiences and became one of the most discussed horror films ever made. Shelley's performance was unforgettable, but the filming was notoriously brutal. Kubrick demanded dozens upon dozens of takes, pushing Shelley into states of exhaustion and panic that were captured forever on screen. She later admitted the experience left her drained, saying it was one of the hardest things she had ever endured. Critics and fans still debate whether the psychological toll of that production contributed to her eventual withdrawal from Hollywood. Still, in the early 80s, she carried on. She starred opposite Robin Williams in Popeye as Olive Oyl, played unique roles in projects like Time Bandits, and even expanded into producing. She created Fairy Tale Theater in 1982, a beloved children's anthology that ran for 6 years and featured stars like Robin Williams, Mick Jagger, and Jeff Goldblum. It was proof that she was more than an actress. She was a creator with vision, capable of bringing Hollywood talent into whimsical, family-friendly storytelling. And yet, after decades of steady work, her career slowed in the 90s. By 2002, with her appearance in Manna from Heaven, Shelley quietly stepped away from the screen. There was no farewell tour, no official retirement announcement, no magazine cover explaining her decision. She simply disappeared from Hollywood's radar. For an actress once so visible, the silence was startling. Fans wondered, had Hollywood abandoned her, or had she chosen to abandon Hollywood? The truth, as it turned out, was not a single answer. It was a chain of events, personal, financial, and emotional, that began piling up in the mid-90s, reshaping her life in ways no one could have predicted. But those shifts were only just beginning. When people look back on Shelley Duvall's career, the first question they often ask is why she would ever walk away at the height of her fame. To understand that decision, you have to look at what was happening in her personal life outside of the spotlight. The shift began in the mid-1990s, and it had nothing to do with declining talent or dwindling offers. Instead, it came from a series of blows that would have shaken anyone's sense of stability. In January of 1994, the Northridge earthquake hit Los Angeles with devastating force. Shelley's home was among those damaged, and the disaster forced her to reconsider her life in California. For someone who had always valued her independence, suddenly losing the comfort and safety of her home was a jarring reminder of how fragile stability could be. The quake itself was a turning point, not just for Shelley, but for thousands of residents who chose to relocate. For her, it planted the seed that maybe life away from Hollywood could be healthier. But the real push came from something much more personal. Around the same time, Shelley's brother was diagnosed with spinal cancer. She had always been close to her family, and the news hit her hard. Instead of staying in Los Angeles to chase more roles, she packed up her life and returned to Texas. To friends and colleagues in Hollywood, it looked sudden. But to Shelley, family came first. She was the kind of person who would never abandon those she loved during a crisis, even if it meant stepping away from a career that had defined her for decades. Once back in Texas, she tried to maintain a connection to the industry, but the truth was clear. Her priorities had shifted. The spotlight no longer seemed as important as being present for her loved ones. At the same time, she faced another challenge: money. Despite her long list of credits, Shelley was not among the highest-paid stars of her era. Hollywood is notorious for underpaying actors who do not fit the conventional mold of leading men and women, and Shelley, with her unconventional looks and eccentric roles, often fell into that category. She earned steady work, but not the kind of money that sets someone up for life. Producing projects like fairy tale theater had given her creative satisfaction, but even that venture was not the financial windfall many assumed. By the late 90s, she was dealing with financial strain, the kind of stress that made it easier to walk away rather than fight for roles in an increasingly competitive industry. Younger actresses were coming up. Hollywood was shifting into a new era of blockbuster filmmaking, and Shelley's unique presence was not as in demand as it had been in the 70s and 80s. For her, the decision was not a dramatic announcement, but a quiet retreat. She did not tell the press she was done, nor did she make a grand farewell appearance. She simply stopped showing up on screen. And while fans speculated about everything from a lack of offers to a fallout with the industry, the reality was that she had been pulled back home by forces stronger than ambition. But the story did not stop there. Moving back to Texas may have given her comfort, but it also led to years of isolation, whispers about her health, and one of the most controversial television appearances of her life. And what came next would leave fans shocked and worried in ways no one saw coming. Life in Texas offered Shelley distance from Hollywood's glare, but it also brought new challenges. Without the steady rhythm of sets, scripts, and creative work, she began to drift into a quieter, more isolated existence. Friends later described her as private, often withdrawn, and increasingly suspicious of the world around her. Whispers began circulating that Shelley was not well. Locals noticed her reclusive behavior, and small anecdotes began trickling into the media, fueling rumors about her health. Over time, those whispers hardened into something more tragic. Shelley herself began speaking in ways that alarmed those around her. Reports surfaced that she feared unseen forces were following her. At one point, she contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation, convinced that threats were being made against her. To outsiders, it looked like paranoia. To Shelley, it was real, terrifying, and consuming. For many years, she lived quietly, largely unnoticed except by those in her Texas community. But in 2016, her struggles suddenly became public in the most jarring way possible. Television host Dr. Phil McGraw reached out and persuaded Shelley to appear on his show. The episode that followed became one of the most criticized moments in daytime television. On camera, Shelley was frail, disoriented, and visibly unwell. At one point, she said bluntly, "I am very sick. I need help," instead of offering compassion or dignity. The program presented her condition in a sensationalized way, framing her illness as entertainment. Viewers were stunned, not by Shelley's condition, but by how the show chose to expose it. Critics accused Dr. Phil of exploitation, turning a vulnerable woman into a spectacle for ratings. The backlash was swift. Actresses like Mia Farrow condemned the episode, calling it cruel. Vivian Kubrick, daughter of Stanley Kubrick, called it appallingly cruel exploitation. Even casual viewers sensed that the program had crossed a line. Instead of helping Shelley, it had humiliated her, reducing her legacy to a tragic punchline. In the years that followed, Shelley herself admitted she regretted ever appearing on the show. The experience only deepened her distrust of the media and made her withdraw further. Yet, oddly enough, that dark chapter also served as a wake-up call for the public. People who had once forgotten Shelley Duvall suddenly remembered her not as a tabloid curiosity, but as a human being who deserved empathy. The Dr. Phil fallout marked a turning point. Instead of letting her story end with tragedy, some began to wonder if there was a way back for her. The whispers of her decline had become headlines, but her story was not finished. Beneath the pain and the years of silence, there was still the artist who had once captivated the world. And soon enough, Shelley would remind us of that in the most unexpected way, by returning to the craft that had made her unforgettable in the first place. After the painful attention of the Dr. Phil interview, Shelley Duvall once again withdrew from the public eye. But this time, it was not a sudden disappearance. It was a choice to live life on her own terms, in a small town far away from the cameras that had once followed her every move. She settled in Blanco, Texas, a quiet community near Austin, where she became something of a local figure. Neighbors described her as kind, approachable, and sometimes eccentric, but always unmistakably herself. For nearly 2 decades, she lived this way, without agents, without premieres, and without the pressures of an industry that had both celebrated and scarred her. In Blanco, she found a rhythm of life that had nothing to do with Hollywood. She spent time with her longtime partner, musician Dan Gilroy, who had been with her since the 1980s. Together, they lived modestly, away from the chaos of Los Angeles. For the first time since her early days with Robert Altman, Shelley's life was not dictated by scripts or directors. It was defined by quiet mornings, familiar faces in the neighborhood, and a slower pace that gave her space to breathe. Still, there was always curiosity about her. Fans and journalists would occasionally track her down, asking if she would ever return to the screen. For years, the answer seemed to be no. Shelley was out of Hollywood, and that was where she intended to stay. But as time passed, something began to shift. The same industry that had once overlooked her started to reconsider her legacy. Retrospectives of her work appeared online. Young filmmakers cited her as an influence, and new generations discovered the shining and 3 women through streaming services. Slowly, the narrative changed. Shelley was no longer forgotten. She was being rediscovered, and in 2022, the unthinkable happened. Shelley Duvall returned to acting. Independent director Scott Goldberg cast her in the horror film The Forest Hills, her first project in 20 years. Fans who saw the trailer were stunned. There she was, older, fragile, yet still carrying the same hypnotic presence she had always brought to the screen. Shelley herself described the experience as so much fun, a reminder that despite everything she had endured, acting was still part of her identity. Her return was not a blockbuster comeback or a red carpet event. It was small, intimate, and deeply personal. For Shelley, it was not about chasing fame again. It was about reconnecting with the part of herself that had always been an artist. The film was modest, but her appearance carried weight far beyond its budget. It showed that resilience was still in her, that even after decades of silence and struggle, she could step back into the light on her own terms. For longtime fans, the return was emotional. They remembered the actress who had once been pushed to her breaking point on a Kubrick set, who had walked away when Hollywood became unbearable, and who had faced her darkest struggles in the public eye. To see her act again was a reminder that she was not defined by her absence. She was defined by her ability to endure. But Shelley's story did not end with her comeback. What followed in her later years was a complicated mix of recognition, neglect, and a legacy that continues to spark debate. And the final chapter of her life revealed just how much Hollywood owed to the woman it had once overlooked. Shelley Duvall's story has never been simple. She was a woman who gave Hollywood some of its most iconic images, yet she was also someone the industry seemed quick to forget. That contradiction became painfully clear in the final chapter of her life. In July of 2024, Shelley passed away at the age of 75. News outlets across the world reported on her death, revisiting her unforgettable unforgettable performances and the mystery of her long disappearance. For many fans, it was a chance to rediscover just how much she had accomplished. Tributes poured in from filmmakers, critics, and audiences who remembered not only Wendy Torrance in The Shining, but also her whimsical work in fairy tale theater and her brave, award-winning turn in Three Women. Yet, when the Emmys held their annual In Memoriam segment that September, Shelley was not included. The omission shocked fans. Social media erupted with disbelief. How could the Television Academy fail to honor the woman who had created and produced a groundbreaking children's series that brought Hollywood stars into fairy tales for nearly a decade? The oversight seemed almost symbolic of the way Shelley had been treated throughout her life, admired in moments, overlooked in others. Even in death, Hollywood struggled to give her the recognition she deserved. But the story did not end with that disappointment. The following year, both the Academy Awards and the Children's and Family Emmy Awards corrected the mistake. At the Oscars, Shelley was finally honored, her image appearing among the luminaries the industry had lost. And, at the Children's Emmys, she was remembered not just as an actress, but as a creator who had brought magic and imagination into countless homes. It was a belated recognition, but a powerful one nonetheless. Shelley's legacy is not only about the roles she played, but about the risks she took. She was never the conventional Hollywood star. She did not look or act like the other leading ladies of her time, and that uniqueness both opened doors and created barriers. She endured grueling shoots, like the one with Kubrick, that pushed her to emotional extremes. She walked away from fame when family and health mattered more. She faced public humiliation on national television, only to remind the world of her talent years later in an independent film. Her career reads like a roller coaster, but her impact is steady. Generations of actors and directors cite her as a bold, fearless performer who refused to be anyone but herself. In many ways, her disappearance from Hollywood made her even more mythical. She became the actress who vanished, only to reappear decades later, proving that some lights never fully dim. Shelley Duvall's life may not have followed the path of a traditional Hollywood success story. It was messier, harder, and at times deeply painful. But that is also what makes her unforgettable. She revealed the fragility behind the glamour, the humanity behind the fame, and the resilience behind the struggles. And now, even though she is gone, her story continues to echo as one of Hollywood's most haunting and inspiring tales. Because in the end, Shelley Duvall did not simply vanish. She chose to step away. And when she returned, she reminded us of exactly why we remembered her in the first place. When people remember Shelley Duvall, the images come quickly. The trembling young wife clutching a baseball bat in The Shining, the wide-eyed dreamer drifting through Altman's Three Women, the lanky animated Olive Oyl singing alongside Robin Williams in Popeye. For many, these characters are frozen in time, snapshots of a career that felt both magical and unpredictable. Yet the truth of Shelley's life is that she was never just those roles. She was a woman constantly navigating the clash between extraordinary talent and very human vulnerabilities. Her disappearance from Hollywood has often been described as a mystery, but in hindsight, it was not so mysterious at all. It was the result of an earthquake that shook her foundation, a family illness that demanded her presence, financial pressures that made the fight for roles exhausting, and mental health battles that required distance from the relentless machine of show business. Hollywood demands everything and rarely gives enough back. Shelley made the radical choice to walk away when it no longer served her well-being. What makes her story resonate today is not simply her absence, but her resilience. Even when reduced to a tabloid spectacle, even when mocked for her struggles, Shelley endured. And when she finally stepped in front of a camera again in the Forest Hills, she did so not because Hollywood begged her, but because she wanted to. That choice matters. It reminds us that behind the glamour, fame, and headlines, actors are human beings who deserve the dignity of deciding their own narratives. Shelley's life also forces us to reflect on the way Hollywood treats its stars. She was celebrated when she fit a director's vision and discarded when she no longer did. She was praised for her creativity in children's programming, then overlooked when it came time for recognition. Even her final farewell was mishandled, with her exclusion from the Emmy Memorial Reel. But in the end, fans and peers made sure her name was remembered, proving that legacy is not controlled by institutions, but by the people who cherish the work. Her story is a cautionary tale about the cost of fame, but also a deeply human one about survival. Shelley Duvall showed the world that vulnerability does not erase strength. She stepped away for 20 years, only to re-emerge and remind us of the artist she had always been. That resilience may be her greatest legacy. So when we ask why she vanished, perhaps the better question is why we expected her to stay. For Shelley, life was never about feeding the Hollywood machine forever. It was about creating art, then finding peace, even if it meant disappearing from the very stage that made her famous. And now that her story is complete, one truth stands clear. Shelley Duvall did not fade away. She remains unforgettable, not because she was always in front of us, but because when she was, she gave us everything she had. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind Shelley Duvall's story, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. There are so many more hidden Hollywood stories, and you will not want to miss what comes next.